A stopover, that is how the Taiwanese trip to the U.S. was described. Knowing how much that would anger China, the Taiwanese president went ahead with it anyways. The result, 3-day drills by China was announced, which included 71 Chinese military aircraft. Was this gamble worth the price? Is the U.S. using Taiwan as a pawn against China? In this edition of The Spotlight, we will look at those angles and also cover the opposition to the Taiwanese president's stopover, who saw or witnessed the stopover and all the issues related to it as threats to peace in the East Asian region, along with negatively impacting the Taiwanese economy. Let me first introduce our guest for this edition of The Spotlight. John Ross, Senior Fellow at Changyang Institute and Renmin University of China, joins us from London. Also joining us, Arnold August, author and journalist, who joins us from Montreal. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Let me go to our guest in London first, John Ross, looking at this stopover as it was described by the Taiwanese president in the U.S. Basic question, do you think that this was worth it?
Well, it depends who you think it was worth it for. For people who wish to create a great deal of tension in the world and stir up problems between China and the United States, I assume it was very well worth it. If it was intended to put forward the interests of the global community or the people of China or the people of Taiwan, no, it was definitely not a good idea and not worth it. So it depends what you want to do. I mean, the aim of the visit, both on the part of the Speaker of the House of Representatives and of the leader of the Taipei administration, was to create a great deal of tension, and that's what they tried to do. But the consequences are going to be suffered by chiefly around Taiwan and also to some extent by people of the world. No, if from the point of view of general interests of the world, it was definitely not worth it. From the point of view of people who want to create trouble, yes, it probably was worth it.
Well, Arnold August, the Taiwanese president has said things like external pressure will not hinder our determination to go to the world, or we are calm and confident, will neither yield nor provoke. Taiwan will firmly walk on the road of freedom and democracy and go into the world. The whole notion here behind these statements, the stance that the Taiwanese president has, and knowing full well how this stopover would have angered China, do you think it's the Taiwanese president making these moves, these statements, or are we looking at the U.S. being behind the way Taiwan is provoking China?
I think that in the main, it's the U.S. is behind this, but of course with the full collaboration of the Taipei administration. I mean, irrespective of what they say, for example, they want to follow the road of democracy and all that, and the United States has also made similar statements that, you know, while we welcome the visit to Washington, to the United States of the representative of the Taipei administration, like, what do the words of the U.S. mean? I mean, just recent history, we found out that the Minsk agreement, which was supposed to, you know, be a platform for finding a peaceful solution in Ukraine, we found out that it was just a hoax. They worked out the Minsk agreement just to stall for time in order to weaken Russia. And the same type of hypocritical lies, I would say, coming out of Taipei, as well as from the White House and the State Department, are also cannot be counted on. I mean, the United States, you know, Taiwan won that. I mean, it was good for them. They made the plunge, and they got a lot of comments positively from the allies of the United States. But I think that, you know, John pointed out the dangers that beset the people as a result of any type of conflict surrounding Taiwan and China is very bad for the world. I'd just like to, on that point, raise one issue. Like, I've been thinking, people are discussing on the social media, you know, is United States really able and willing to carry out a war simultaneously against Russia and also some kind of a war against China? Well, I've been thinking about that. I think in order to evaluate the United States with regards to its foreign policy, we have to start with this fact that the United States is based on American exceptionalism. That is, irrespective of the military options, the political options, whatever sanctions. The main goal of the United States since its inception, at the very beginning, has always saw itself as the beacon on the hill to bring democracy, peace, and civilization to the whole world. Like when we watch Biden speak, or even before that, Trump or Obama, they are really caught up in this ideology that we are the best. So people have to be aware that even though it may not be logical to us that the United States would go on two fronts at the same time, Russia and China, this is always possible because of this mindset, this messianic mindset instilled in the ruling circles of the United States, that they can do anything in order to impose their hegemony.
Yeah, I think out of the 244 years since the inception of the U.S. Arnold August, 200 years of it, they've been in wars. I think if I'm recollecting that piece of data correctly. But John Ross, you talked about countries around the world. I think you mentioned that in your statements. Not all countries are on board with the way Taiwan is moving ahead. Looking at the last piece of stat, we're looking at, I think it was the gradual loss of this official recognition was amplified when Honduras shifted loyalty. This happened just a few days back, or a week ago, leaving just 13 countries with formal ties with Taiwan. So if Taiwan knows that, then why does it go ahead with, you know, stopovers or reception of high-ranking U.S. officials?
Well, I think that because it basically creates tension. I mean, what Taiwan wants to do is the Taiwan administration, it wants a lot of support from the United States, military aid, economic aid, etc. And it doesn't want good relations. I mean, there are several regimes in the world like this. They thrive on conflict. I mean, in Europe, we got the Polish government, for example, which really wants a big crisis with Russia because it helps think it'll get a lot of support from the United States. So what the Taiwan administration wants to do is stir things up. It's got to be very careful because it knows at the present time there's a limit to what the United States will do, because the United States don't want a war with China over the question of Taiwan, at least the majority of position. There are some people in the United States who openly advocate it. But I mean, this is likely to become a nuclear war. And therefore, the US, for example, is not prepared at the present time to tolerate Taiwan declaring independence. But therefore, the Taiwan regime has to find some way to stir up trouble without getting out of the situation with the United States. But we should be quite clear, the United States determined this. If the United States said, don't come to the United States, if Biden made a phone call and said, don't come, if you do come, there's going to be trouble, she wouldn't have come. So there's not something being imposed on the United States. They give the green light to it.
Well, I mean, you talk about the United States that's being steered, Arnold August, by Joe Biden, who has on the Taiwanese issue, I think they actually have a term for it. The U.S. is always so good at these terms. Strategic ambiguity, where in one case they say, no, the one China principle does work, and no, we're not, you know, up for the independence of Taiwan. That's not something that we want. But at the same time, Biden has said, well, we will defend Taiwan if China makes any moves, which goes against that principle. What is the U.S. stance, Arnold August, as far as you can recollect?
Well, what they call ambiguity is really a fancy word for outright imperialist hypocrisy, that we cannot believe anything that the U.S. administration has said, is saying now or in the future. It's just beyond the pale of the political culture of the United States. And I think perhaps one of the reasons, you mentioned they're allies of the United States, I think one of the reasons that despite the obvious dangers of creating a provocation with China around Taiwan is that the United States has its allies that are backing the United States. And I would like to mention one coming from Canada, that Canada, okay, has been in lockstep with the United States on China now for several years. I mean, including making all kinds of xenophobic statements directly or indirectly. Now, you know, it's interesting in Canada, Pierre Trudeau, I don't agree with everything he did, but he did go to China as a young intellectual, even though he was being berated as coming close to the communists in China. He then wrote a book on his visit to China expressly to oppose the Yellow Peril scare. It's written by him. And, even other, for example, the prime minister before that, John Diefenbaker, the 1950s, 1960s, a conservative, he said the following: when I shake hands with the Chinese, I feel confident that their word is given, because, he says, the Chinese thought, including in communist government, is also steeped in Confucianism and other Asian philosophy, which honors straightforward, honest thinking. So, the current Trudeau government has made a major change in U.S. policy with regards to China, and this must surely encourage the United States, because what would have happened, just imagine, is that while the United States is ramping up all this thing about China, if the Trudeau government said, oh, wait, we don't agree with that, everything would fall apart. But the contrary is taking place. They are fully supporting the Biden administration's current offensive against China.
Okay, well, John Ross, when it comes to the Chinese reaction, it's pretty evident that they were angered. 70 Chinese military aircrafts, 9 warships, which have been detected now around Taiwan, which has been announced with the 3 days of military drills. We saw what happened when the former U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. How many times can the Chinese button be pushed before we see further reaction, meaning further than just military exercises around Taiwan?
Well, that's information you can only judge from within the Chinese government. I mean, I've been in the head of at the top of administration of a large city, London, and I know from that even in that you can't take certain decisions without having all the knowledge that's available to that. You can't take from outside, and that applies even more to a country. The only people who are in a position to have the sources of information on how best to respond to that is the Chinese government. So far, as regards the development of the country, they've taken very sensible and good decisions, which have been highly successful, raising it from one of the poorest countries in the world in 1949 to the brink of a high-income economy. So I'm pretty confident that they'll continue to take sensible decisions, but I'm not going to try to guess from outside, not merely for principle, because you can't decide unless you have access to the information which a government has.
Okay. Well, what's interesting about this whole Taiwan issue, John Ross, is the opposition. There is quite a bit of opposition to this. I'm looking at some of the statements that have been made regarding this, and one of them is that this comes from an opposition party that has said, we're not with President of Taiwan on this whole issue. More than 50 civil organizations actually staged these joint protests. And let's see, one of the stances that has come up here is that the Democratic Progressive Party of Eng Sang-wen is jeopardizing Taiwan's sovereignty, where it said, she's back today, yet instead of honor, she brought back, I'm quoting, bigger threats to peace in the East Asian region and both sides of the Taiwan Strait. I think they have a valid point. Do you agree? Arnold August? Arnold August. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that what you said is right. I don't, with regards to the main feature, of the visit of the former president to China, it forever, at least for the coming period, broke up the notion that Taiwan is a hegemony, is homogeneous, I should say, and that everyone in Taiwan agrees with the ruling circles there, and there's an antagonistic stand against China. Now, I think that with regard to this, the American government is perhaps hoping that nothing will happen, but another thing has come up, and that there is official opposition in Taiwan, not official in the sense that there's real opposition, but over 50 organizations, I believe, that signed a declaration opposing the current Taiwanese administration's stand towards China. Now, it's of course interesting, while the Western media flocked over and amplified the rioters in Hong Kong, they do not give any attention to those who are in opposition in Taiwan against the current administration.
Another sentiment coming out of the opposition, John Ross, is, and I'm going to have to quote again, what we're looking at here from one of the opposition parties, the U.S. is using Taiwan as a pawn, and what the DPP authorities are doing is a betrayal to Taiwan. Who are they selling out Taiwan to? The U.S. Are people like us in Taiwan allowing it to happen? It's impossible. What do you think?
Well, indeed. I mean, the DPP is something that wasn't reported in the most recent elections that took place in Taiwan. Suffered a resounding defeat in the elections. It is very probable that the DPP will be ejected from power. But of course, you don't have any reports about that in the Western media, because the fact that the population is deeply dissatisfied with the Taipei administration wouldn't fit in with the narrative that people are attempting to spin. So no, they don't want it. I mean, what we have here is a situation. You've got an absolute minority regime in Taiwan, which is trying to stir up trouble, and at the behest of the United States. I mean, that's the important. Don't get the idea that this is not being carried out without the collaboration of the United States. The United States can put a stop to all this any moment that it wants to. It just says, if you carry on in this way, you can forget about your arms deals and economic aid and all that type of thing. Stop it, and it'll stop immediately. So it's not being carried out against there. Biden's been cynical. On the one hand, he can't go against the one China policy, not merely because that was the basis on which the United States created relations with China, but because most of the rest of the world, the last time I can remember, 185 countries in the world agree with the one China policy and 13 don't. I mean, that's pretty overwhelming. Therefore, he'd have a tremendous, even his closest allies probably wouldn't go. Maybe Canada would nowadays, but most even of his allies wouldn't go along with that. So he's just playing a two-faced game. On the one hand, he's claiming he's for the one China policy, and on the other hand, he's stirring it up, and the world should just call it by its right name.
So let's look at the Russia's special military operation to Ukraine, which has been compared to this situation, Arnold August, if you agree. Because according to many, there are concerns in the U.S. that this special military operation might actually embolden China to move against Taiwan. There are similarities, if you agree. And what are the chances? I won't ask John Ross that question because he doesn't like to predict those types of scenarios, from what I understand, John Ross. But Arnold August, what do you think? I mean, are we looking at this being something similar to the way that the U.S., through NATO, inched closer and closer to Russia, and now it's somewhat executing almost the same type of scenario here with Taiwan, giving it arms, these provocations, etc., the chances that then would make China make a move, perhaps?
Well, I think firstly, of course, the two situations are different. On the one hand, you have Ukraine, that's in Europe, and the South Asian Sea is another geopolitical area. At the same time, I agree with many commentators, whether they're pro-Russian or against Russian, pro-Taiwan or against Taiwan, that they're openly describing what is happening now between the United States on the one hand and China, Taiwan on the other hand, is indeed the possible grooming of Taiwan to be a pawn against China in the same way that they used and still use Ukraine against Russia. Now, of course, as John said, Taiwan is not innocent. It is being done with the United States and vice versa. At the same time, what kind of conclusions can they reach? Can they really believe that using Ukraine as a pawn against Russia worked? I mean, the whole world knows now that the government in Kiev is a Nazi government. They have, Russia has been able to defend itself against 30 countries, the most well-armed 30 countries, armaments and all that. It's not over yet. So I don't know whether they consider this to be a victory for Ukraine, but they must be dreaming of putting, how like ostriches putting their head in the sand. It is not a victory for Ukraine and NATO in Europe. And of course, China would be even a bigger nightmare for the West, because look at China's standing as a socialist country, as a country that offers so much aid to other countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America. It's an entirely different ballgame. And, if the United States tries to use Taiwan as a pawn against China, their defeat on that issue, I'm not talking militarily at this time, but politically, will be much more resounding than their impending defeat of the using Ukraine as a pawn against Russia.
Okay, we're going to end it there. Thank you so much, John Ross, Senior Fellow at the Changyang Institute, Renmin University of China from London, Arnold August, author and journalist from Montreal. Thank you to you both. With that, we come to an end for this edition of The Spotlight, where we cover Taiwan and the team. It's goodbye.